So, we all know the Flintstones. The Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're a modern Stone Age family, a patriot out of history, and yabba dabba doo and all of that. Assuming you're familiar with the show, there's also the ill-fated chance that you're painfully aware of the two live-action films based on said property. The Flintstones, released in 1994, and the prequel, The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas, released in 2000. These films are often ignored, and the only time I ever see them brought up nowadays is when a typical angry YouTube critic reviews them. Seeing as I had nothing better to do, I took it upon myself to watch both of these movies and give them a fair review. So today I'll be taking a look at the Flintstones movies and discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly. What better place to start than with the 1994 film?
John Goodman, Rick Moranis, Elizabeth Perkins, Rosie O'Donnell, Kyle MacLachlan, Halle Berry, Jonathan Winters, the BC-52s, and Elizabeth Taylor.
Fred Flintstone, you've arrived.
I'm only one man.
Not from the back.
It doesn't get any better than this.
Steven Spielrock presents The Flintstones.
The Flintstones movie actually started its script writing phase back in the mid-80s. Eventually, Brian Levant, director of such classics as Beethoven and Problem Child 2, yeesh, was chosen to direct. He was chosen because he was a Flintstones fan with an impressive collection, which, yeah, makes sense. The Flintstones movie stars John Goodman and Rick Moranis as Fred and Barney. Probably the most perfect casting in all of film history, right next to Matthew Lillard as Shaggy. Elizabeth Perkins and Rosie O'Donnell play Wilma and Betty here, and I think they're pretty good. Some people seem to hate the Rosie O'Donnell casting, but you've gotta admit, she pulls off that laugh perfectly. The film follows a pretty basic plot that feels straight out of the cartoon for the most part. Fred Flintstone gives the Rubbles the money to adopt a child, and Barney wants to find a way to repay him. So he secretly switches out a test to ensure that Fred gets a promotion. After being promoted, Fred moves up the social ladder and leaves his friends and family behind. While all of this is happening, Vice President Cliff Vanderclave, played by the one and only Kyle MacLachlan, and his assistant, Sharon Stone, played by Halle Berry, devise a plan to run away with the company's money and blame the act on Fred Flintstone, making him a wanted criminal among the people of Bedrock. The plot of the movie really does just feel like an episode of the show stretched out to movie length, and you're either going to be on board with it or bored with it. I actually admired that aspect of it, as it never felt like it was trying too hard to be this big Hollywood movie, at least story-wise. The only time it started to feel a little too Hollywood was towards the end, when Cliff Vanderclave kidnaps the children and Fred and Barney have to save them, but that's just a small part of the movie. Pebbles and Bam Bam are both in this movie as well, although they appear much older than their cartoon counterparts. I fully understand the reasoning behind it. I mean, it's pretty much impossible to give real babies the defined characteristics of these cartoon characters. Unless you want to see CG babies in 1994, but God forbid that ever happen.
Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka.
The production design here is actually incredible and the real highlight of the movie. So much love was put into the look of this film, everything feels accurate to the cartoon. I especially love the decision to have the Jim Henson Company create more cartoony looking dinosaurs along with other prehistoric creatures. Much of the appeal of this movie just comes from watching the way they convert 2D to live action, and as opposed to many other live action adaptations, it works. The jokes, aka the driving force of this comedy film, are another matter, as many of them either fall flat or come off as a bit confusing.
And on your left, you'll be able to see the Grand Canyon. In about 15 million years.
That's not to say that the movie is completely humorless. There was actually quite a few jokes that did land for me, and it's a shame that the entire movie couldn't be consistently that funny.
Okay, Brother Flintstone, we need a strike to win. Can you do it?
Hey, is the Earth flat?
There's also some elements of the plot that really don't make much sense once you put any thought into it, like the fact that the Rubbles decide to adopt a child while they're broke is one of the most irresponsible things any parent could do. Someone in this time period needs to invent Child Protective Services so we can get this child out of the rebels' possession ASAP. And I hope you like rock puns because this movie is filled with them. Guys, Rock Donalds. Rock Donalds.
Fellow lodge members, introducing one that is truly unique, one of extraordinary appeal, the Grand Poobah Supersized Meal at Rock Donald's.
But damn, does that Grand Poobah supersized meal sound good right now. I mean, supersized fries, a McRib, and a drink in one of those 6 Flintstone cups, all for the low price of $3.99. Call me Samurai Jack, cause I've gotta get back to the past. And not to mention the Flintstones collectible mugs. Remember when fast food restaurants would give you cool stuff like that? Like, whatever happened to that?
So collect all 4, because even before they're gone, they're history. What you want is what you get at Rock Donald's today.
I love it here.
This movie also has an uncomfortable fixation on feet. Like, I know nobody wears shoes in this movie, but there's more present than a Tarantino movie. I'm onto you, Brian Levant. And what would a Flintstones movie be without the classic Flintstones theme? This time covered by the band the B-52s. My bad, I mean the BC-52s. And if you're trying to imagine how that would sound, you are correct. Overall, The Flintstones is a film that I have no quarrel with. It's not very good, as mentioned before, a lot of the jokes fall flat, but it's much too competent for me to call it a bad movie. Not to mention that the film goes beyond what's expected, giving us some enticing commentary on the working class versus upper class lifestyle. Although in hindsight, Fred denying the chance to make a shit ton of money off of the invention of concrete at the end was probably a bad decision.
It's a great job, and this time you deserve it.
Barney, all my life I wanted to be a somebody, and when I finally did, I turned into somebody I didn't like.
Good grief, man. Have you lost your mind? This could make you rich.
You could have donated the money to the workers or even given it to Barney and Betty. Think about their kid, Fred. My overall consensus on this film is that it's just okay. Most people won't care for it, but if you're a fan of the Flintstones cartoon, there's a good chance you may get some enjoyment out of it. I have no regrets watching it, which is more than I can say for its sequel.
The Flintstones are back in a brand new motion picture.
Barney, tonight we shower.
The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. Rated PG. Now playing.
6 years later, we got the prequel that nobody asked for, The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas, with Brian Levant returning as director and none of the original cast returning. Although seeing as it is a prequel, that's something I'm willing to excuse. And I'm gonna be honest with y'all, until this point that I decided to review this, I thought this film was direct-to-video. Viva Rock Vegas starts off with the alien, Gazoo, horrifically portrayed by Alan Cumming, being cast out from his society to the planet Earth to study human mating habits. In case you are unfamiliar with Gazoo, he's a character that was added to later seasons when the show was losing steam. A lot of people blame him for the show's downfall, but it was honestly a combination of many things. His reason for exile isn't really explored too much in this movie, but in the original cartoon it was because he created a doomsday device that would destroy the universe with the touch of a button. This man is simply too dangerous to be kept alive. The extremely uncanny opening is immediately followed up with a dinosaur fart joke, which really sets the mood for the rest of the movie.
Look out! She's gonna blow!
The rest of the movie is all about Wilma and Betty meeting Fred and Barney and falling in love, although Wilma turns out to be secretly rich and is deeply ashamed of this. After a family dinner gone wrong, the villain of the film, Chip Rockefeller, invites the 4 of them to Rock Vegas, where he attempts to frame Fred for the stealing of Wilma's pearl necklace, in order to trick her into marrying him instead. The casting of this movie all feels incredibly off. It's understandable that they went with all different actors, seeing as how long the wait was between films, but it's still a major problem with the movie. I think Jane Krakowski does an alright Betty, and Stephen Baldwin does as good as he can with Barney.
Wait a minute, Fred. I'll bet we get wishes.
Pardon?
Yeah, we let you out of the fancy bottle. Now we get wishes, right?
But Mark Addy and Kristen Johnson just don't feel right. Mark Addy always feels like he's putting on a Fred Flintstone impression, which he is, but it doesn't come off as natural as when John Goodman portrayed him.
I'm not gonna study tonight. I'm gonna get a good night's rest, get up extra early, and study in the morning. That way, everything will still be right up front in my noggin by the time I get to work to take the test.
And while Kristen Johnson isn't a bad actress, she just doesn't feel at all right for the role of Wilma.
Oh no, now ladies, don't start chiseling those invitations just yet.
I read a Letterboxd review that compared this to a Flintstones porno, and yeah, it really does give off that vibe. Much of the conflict in this movie comes from misunderstandings, whether it be Betty assuming Wilma is poor only to discover how wealthy she is, Fred being blamed for a robbery, or Betty thinking Barney is cheating on her and ditching him for Mick Jagged and the Stones. Yep, you heard that right. Mick Jagged.
Are you?
Yeah. Mick Jagged's at your service.
Surprisingly enough, the character of Mick Jagged is also portrayed by Alan Cumming, and he's probably the best part of the movie, which really isn't saying much.
What do you think, Betty? Should I stick my butt out a bit further? Does it look good like that?
Among other celebrities in this movie, you'll see John Cho, but he's only in it for like 5 seconds, so there's that.
I don't care if you're going to the opera, pal. You're not going in my car.
There is quite a lot of Uncanny Valley stuff in this movie, not just Gazoo, but they ditched a lot of the impressive Jim Henson puppets in favor of early 2000s CG, and it really does not hold up. I keep feeling like the animals in this movie are going to jump out of the screen and attack me at any moment. The idea to have part of the plot center around Wilma and how she got her pearl necklace is also a strange decision. Not once in my life have I ever wondered where she got that necklace, but now I know, and my life is neither better or worse because of it. Gazoo's inclusion in the film is also questionable. In the show, he would usually use his alien powers to attempt to help Fred and Barney, but here he just does nothing. I can't help but feel like they just felt like they had to include him because he was in the show and no other reason. Instead of another cover of the Flintstones theme, this time we get a cover of the Elvis Presley song that will forever be ingrained in my mind and won't leave no matter how bad I want it to.
Viva Rock Vegas. Viva Rock Vegas. Viva Rock
And say goodbye to Rock Donald's, because this time it's all about Bronto King and their giant inedible plastic burgers. McDonald's took one look at Viva Rock Vegas and went, nope. Although I do like that the toys included in the kids' meals are modeled after their cartoon likeness. That's fun.
Would you want to live back then? No way. Look at this menu. No burgers and big kids meal.
Overall, what it all comes down to is whether or not the movie is funny, and I'm gonna have to say no. I'll admit there was one or two jokes that did make me laugh, but the vast majority of them just didn't land. The jokes in Viva Rock Vegas rarely play with the whole modern Stone Age setting, which is where a lot of the best jokes came from in the original. Upon reading what critics had to say about this movie, many of them actually considered it an improvement over the 1994 film. I don't know what movie they watched, but I refuse to believe it was Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. Is this movie the worst thing ever? Nah, I've seen far worse movies than this, but it's not really worth anyone's time either. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts on both Flintstones movies. If you had to pick just one to watch, go watch the first movie. Although there's nothing wrong with avoiding them altogether either. Just yabba dabba do whatever you yabba dabba want. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.
Red light CD gonna set my soul, gonna set my soul on fire. An awful lot of money that's ready to burn. Oh, you better get those stakes up high. There's 1,000 guys waiting out there, and they're all living, the devil may care. And I'm just a little devil with a lot of love to spare.